Hi everyone, my name's Ken Crouch and I'm the Head of Industry Development at Screen Australia. Due to technical difficulties, we have recorded this short introduction to the Screen Success through Inclusion and Access webinar that took place earlier today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation where I am today, and I'd like to further acknowledge all of the lands and countries across Australia where you are all watching from. I take the opportunity to pay my respect to elders past and present and recognise and respect that this land has been cared for by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people and communities for thousands of years. I extend that respect and acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people watching this webinar recording. In this webinar, you'll hear from leading voices in inclusive and accessible production as they discuss a range of approaches to make it easier to understand how you can make your productions more inclusive and accessible. Our speakers include Access Coordinator Stephanie Dower from Dower Productions, who will be explaining how an Access Coordinator can support productions in providing better access for their cast and their crew. Also joining us is Paul Nunnari PSM and CEO of Inclusively Made, who will be introducing us to their groundbreaking certification framework that's streamlining inclusion practices across film, TV, and advertising production. We also have Tracy Corbin-Matchett, OAM, CEO of Bus Stop Films, who will be explaining how Bus Stop Employment provides vital consultation services and mentee placement opportunities. And finally, Joe Thatcher, who is the Deputy Head of Production at EndemolShine Australia and producer of Headliners, who will be sharing their first-hand experience while producing this upcoming production, which will be featuring soon on the ABC. I hope that by the end of this webinar, you will have received practical guidance and have increased confidence in achieving your inclusion and accessibility goals on your upcoming screen production or project. I'll now hand you over to the recording from today's webinar. But let's get started. Steph, let's start with you. Thank you for joining us. You were one of the inaugural cohort of Access Coordinators that were trained up with the support of Screen Australia. That was almost 12 months ago, or more than 12 months ago now.
Just on 12 months, yeah.
Yeah, can you please maybe provide us a summary of what your role as an Access Coordinator does and how it helps to increase access on productions and across the whole production cycle of the whole production process?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on the panel today, and just want to pay my respects to the lands on which I'm coming to you from today, the land of the Yagara and Turrbal people. So access coordinators are a brand new role in the Australian screen industry context. They've been around a little bit in the US and the UK over the past few years. But what an access coordinator does is, I like to think of us as like the go-to person for all things access and inclusion related on screen productions, right from development all the way through to delivery of the final film or TV series, whatever it may be. So we're there to essentially guide, advise, oversee, and signpost anything that, whether it's in the script, whether it's character related, whether it's crew or cast working behind the scenes that have access requirements themselves in order to perform their jobs effectively. We're there to sort of assist productions and assist individuals with access requirements to ensure that everything is addressed suitably for all parties involved. And to, I guess, almost be a little bit of like a conduit between, because I think, this is an area that, we know we want more diversity and inclusion on our screens, in our stories. We know in order to achieve that, we need to have greater representation and inclusion behind the scenes. In order to do that, we need to feel confident and empowered to ensure that our productions and our sets and our work environments are inclusive and set up to empower people to perform their jobs effectively. So we're essentially there as an individual to assist producers, production managers, heads of departments, and the individuals themselves to ensure that access and inclusion is handled in a way that is best practice and in a way that is beneficial to all parties involved.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that question. Just so that I've just saw in the Q&A there was some issues with the Auslan interpreter being seen. I think that has now been fixed. I apologize for that, but if there is any issues, please keep on letting us know in the Q&A, because our team behind the comms is actually going to help make sure that that is rectified. Thank you, Steph. Tracy, you're here from Bus Stop Films and also Bus Stop Employment. You're the CEO there. For those of our viewers who don't know who Bus Stop is, don't know if there'd be many of us, but do you want to tell us a bit more about Bus Stop?
Thanks so much, Ken. And I am coming to you from Dower country today, and I want to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. And we're here on the back of 65,000 years of amazing storytellers. So Bus Stop Films is a non-profit social enterprise. We use filmmaking and the screen industry to enact human rights outcomes for people with disability and other marginalised groups. And we do that through skills development, creativity, advocacy, such as battling the federal government on the job access policy or negotiating with the NDIS, and employment. So we have a partnership with film schools across Australia to deliver an accessible filmmaking program for people with intellectual disability or autism. And we've been doing that for near on 16 years now. Separate to that, and within the framework of our organisation, we have Bus Stop Employment, which is a dedicated team within the organisation that is really there to service the industry side, so work with producers and production companies on identifying roles and making their productions inclusive and employing people with disability. And on the same side, we're the only disability employment service servicing the screen industry. And our employment service is open to anyone with disability looking for work in film and TV across deaf, disabled or neurodivergent. So we have editors who are wheelchair users, camera operators who are deaf, and a variety of people from the neurodivergent community and intellectual disability community, blind, low vision, who are part of our cohort of Bus Stop Employment members that we've placed into productions like working with Joe and the team at EndemolShine on Headliners and a number of other productions.
Amazing, thank you. Paul, let's go to you next to give a bit of introduction about Inclusively Made as the CEO. Can you give us a snapshot of what Inclusively Made does and the certification framework that it rolls out?
I sure can, Ken, but that's a very hard act to follow after TCO, so I'll do my best. So yeah, I'm Paul Nunnari. It's great to be here, CEO of Inclusively Made. Basically, in 30 seconds or less, we provide a framework around how a production can be inclusive. Now that sounds kind of basic, and it pretty much is, but one thing we found when talking to productions is they don't want to be tokenistic with inclusion. They just don't want to do something just for the sake of doing it, and they don't want to get it wrong. So the framework really addresses both of those issues in that there's 8 key pillars of inclusion. Those 8 pillars include inclusive casting, inclusive auditions, concept development, broadcast, mentoring, the behind camera, basically the whole gamut from concept right through to the broadcast. And we provide that framework with them one-to-one. Those organisations, those productions can go away and basically implement those key actions under those respective pillars. And they can work with Bus Stop Films, they can work with Steph, and to make those actions into fruition. At post-production, they come back to us. We step through that process with them, and then basically they get certification. It's almost like, it's very similar to the Heart Foundation tick of approval. And in the context of disability inclusion, we'd like to think it really is the global standard of production, of inclusion in production. There's no other framework like it around the world, and the feedback we've had is that it's been seen as a very valuable tool like I said, for productions to know what they're doing is right. And it gives them the confidence to start doing it as business as usual. So inclusion ultimately becomes business as usual in everything that those respective productions may do. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Paul. And I think that we're going to go through this with viewing in a case study, which I'll introduce Joe in a minute, but we'll also go in a bit more depth of each of how your organizations work with productions, and also how each of them are different and how they're complementary as well. Now, Joe, thank you so much for joining us today. You've got an amazing series coming out on the ABC called Headliners, which we're using as a bit of a case study for this webinar today. And now we do have a teaser to play. Did you want to introduce that, or should I just try and get that all playing for you?
Yeah, maybe I'll talk about the series first and then you can play it.
That would be great.
Thank you very, very much for having me on the panel. I'm very honored to be included. We've produced Headliners. So it's a 5-part documentary series that'll air on ABC on the 19th of November. So please tune in and support us. It's the series, I think the goal of the series really was to highlight some of the inequalities in the music industry for people, for performers living with disability, and to kind of ignite a broader conversation about equality and inclusion. The series is, we showcase kind of 9 musicians that we cast from all across Australia, all people living with disability and people who I would say have probably unjustifiably been living under the radar. So we wanted to kind of give them, provide an opportunity for them. And that opportunity that we provided was to perform at the Monday Big Red Bash, which is a massive music festival just outside of Broken Hill over 3 days. It's got 14,000 people. Really to kind of highlight, and in doing so, hopefully sort of highlighting the lack of opportunity and access that there is, in place for them currently. And then, through the series, we essentially kind of follow their experience preparing for that, what's essentially a gig of a lifetime. It's been, I think we've been sort of unofficially, working on this series for a couple of years now. I've been working on it myself for over a year. We've been working with Bus Stop Films. So Tracy, I think you've probably been working on it for about as long as I have now as well. It was a really great show to work on, and so far we've received a lot of positive feedback from those who have seen it. I'm really proud of it. And as I said, please tune in on the 19th of November and support it. And that's all I can say. You can.
Great. All right, let me figure out how to share the teaser, and I'll be 1 second.
A sold-out music festival in the Australian outback is about to make history.
I'm Ellie Mae Barnes. Crazy. And I had a crazy and ambitious idea.
Ellie Mae's on a mission to put 2 bands made up of musicians with disability who've been denied opportunity in front of thousands at the Monday Bash.
Nobody's going to take it easy on them.
Led by rock stars Ella Hooper and Tim Rogers.
It's huge. It's not going to be easy.
And with just 7 weeks until showtime, the pressure is on. In this raw,
I've never been in this space before, and it just feels so nice.
candid,
It's really boring.
what?
I just feel like we'll need to change it up a lot. Wait, I don't get it.
and unapologetic series.
Yeah.
An ambitious idea
Let's make some bloody history.
becomes a very different reality.
I'm not getting it.
And while these musicians won't do it alone,
Ben from Silverchair.
What? Rockstar? All right, Rockstar.
You're never washing this hand again, Delta.
in just 7 weeks, what will they learn?
'Cause we just get one love.
About themselves?
As artists, we do things that other people dream of.
Each other?
We're going to melt some faces off, aren't we?
My heart's pounding.
Keep it cool. Keep it cool.
And can they change the music scene forever?
Amazing. That looks like just such a great show. Congratulations. So for headliners, you worked with both Inclusively Made and also Bus Stop, as you said, and they supported you during that whole production timeline. Can you share with us how you worked with Paul and Tracy and the teams across that production process?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we we've been working with Bus Stop and Paul, from the outset of development. I think, like in simple terms, we engaged them as consultants, but I think really it was it developed into a partnership and a kind of collaboration through the whole production. They really helped us through all aspects of production. And I think, that started with, at the outset, we kind of identified, what was really important for us was that, we needed people with lived experience to help us tell the stories of our contributors, genuinely and authentically. And we needed help to make sure that we were creating an inclusive environment so that, our contributors felt comfortable and were going to kind of open up and share their stories with us. And so, I mean, we didn't really know how to go about that. But, Tracy certainly helped us with that. I think the first thing we did was, a training session, on their advice, which, was with our entire team. And that really, I would say that was kind of essential in the process for us. And it really set the tone of our approach through the production. And it kind of gave our team, like insight, and it gave them confidence to kind of, like it gave them basic tools, I guess, at the outset. And I had a lot of comments from the team, before the training that, they were, in some cases, it was a bit daunting, they don't know what language to use around disability. They don't, they don't want to be perceived to be saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. And so, I think the training really helped them open up, and it educated us to kind of, move forward with confidence through the production. And then I think, then as we kind of had that confidence, that then, and we stepped through casting and pre-production, it really started to then kind of unfold in terms of, the practical things that they were able to offer us. Like in the sense, a lot of the stuff that Bus Stop helped us with initially in casting was integral, like just helping, read documents, read our casting call out, making suggestions about how we can make sure we're not excluding people, suggestions on supports that we might offer to people that we're trying to get onto the show, and ways in which we can kind of communicate with them more effectively. And so, and that was really helpful. And that kind of, support and kind of guidance then just continued through each phase. Paul helped us in a very practical way as well, with a lot of access things. So Paul kind of came and recce'd all of our venues and locations that we were going to film in with our contributors, and helped us kind of work through, resolve issues and, I mean, what we discovered was that there's not a lot of venues that are accessible in Sydney. We tried hundreds of places to find suitable music venues, which was quite disheartening. Yeah, and I think they, I mean, I haven't had a chance to thank them yet because we're still, I think we delivered our last final 2 episodes to ABC yesterday. So I've been in post-production, but yeah, both of them really held my hand and the team's hand through the whole process. And it was a fantastic experience. So yeah, so thank you both for that. Yeah, I think that's kind of, I mean, and that also continued on through, the guys have been watching, the episodes in post-production with us, and we've had a panel of, people with, various disabilities kind of helping kind of, focus group the content, just to make sure, I guess, that at each step of the way that we're inclusive and, that we're telling those stories, like I said, from, people with lived experience, because, that's kind of the only way to do it. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Tracy, let's talk to you. Obviously, you've been involved on this production for a long time, but do you want to talk with us about, I suppose, the opportunities that you provided and the support that you provided to the production company, and I suppose what it was like for you and your team supporting this production of Headliners?
Thank you. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Joe. It's been amazing working with the team at EndemolShine. I have to say that they're on board, boots and all, but also really receptive to stopping, pausing, reviewing and refining at every step. And part of our role was to do that training. And obviously when you're doing a casting call, and you don't know who the talent is going to be, you don't know who the crew is going to be, we split that training up into chunks. So we kind of did an overall view, helicopter view, when the team was coming together. And as we're getting closer down to knowing the dynamic of the disabilities of the people that were coming through as going to be the beautiful musicians that you saw, then worked more closely and more refining that sort of how we manage and support and upskill the confidence of the team to work with those people in relation to their individual lived experience. We had our amazing set trained support worker, Seema Dudley, who I think she's on Heartbreak High at the moment as well. She's a bit of the unicorn that we talk about, someone that is a trained and skilled disability support worker, but also has that understanding of production, who worked on the production, went out to Monday, was there for all of the rehearsals, having a wow of a time, working with the on-screen talent to making sure that they're Paul did the environmental stuff and the access, and it was a great teamwork. It showed how the production could really work together around looking at the physical access and the logistics, but also what are the other environmental and the support work. So Seema was there every step of the way when they were filming, so they had someone to go to and could really troubleshoot issues and then work with a solution with the team, and then was on the ground as that go-to. And then we wrapped around the production as a consultancy on the other end of the phone around the language of the social media campaign and the media releases and just all of those processes, so that they had someone there that they could feed off. And because we do have that diverse community of lived experience, that focus group as well, to be able to go through their edits and say, that maybe they're not going to land that well, or that you could have shared this element of the story but done it in a more dignified way, so you're not losing any of the aspect of the creativity. And the team at EndemolShine were on that every step of the way and willing to go, okay, this is how we would have traditionally approached it, that's not going to work, or is not really appropriate in this instance, so we'll move around. And what you see is like an amazing disability-led project by Ellie Mae Barnes coming up with this concept, and then part of the focus groups we've done with the impact campaign of fruiting some greater conversations about the lack of accessible venues in Sydney and music and the creative industries. So it's building that momentum and a well-told unscripted project will really unlock an impact campaign, and this is naturally doing that, and we're really excited to be part of it.
Thank you. Yes, it sounds like it was a great kind of collaboration, especially between Bus Stop and also through EndemolShine, and also Inclusively Made. A lot of the things that you've brought up, both of you, in terms of access and actually understanding those needs and doing it authentically as well, I think it's really important that I might throw to Steph now and just talk with you about how, as an access coordinator, how an access coordinator can actually help to identify and address some of those issues that Joe and Tracy have actually just mentioned. And, you know, the process when you would get involved and, you know, those type of things, and maybe even some of the outcomes that you've achieved for productions or projects that you've worked on, as well as other examples.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just want to echo Headliners looks amazing and I can't wait to watch it next week. So congrats to everyone. In terms of my role as an access coordinator, I think it's important to note that it is a below the line crew position essentially. So we essentially attach ourselves to the production. So we are on the call sheet, we're on the crew list. So we are there to essentially be the, as I said before, like the go-to for all things access and inclusion. So I always say it's best to engage us as soon as you can in the project timeline. So it could be development, but usually access coordinators would be engaged as early in pre-production as possible, because that's really where the bulk of our work starts or is taking place, is the planning process, getting everything organized. So very much like what Paul did for Headliners, you know, we can attend location recce's, we work with the location managers, location assistants, location scouts. We're not there to do the work for them, we're there to help them and empower them to do their job and deliver access solutions within their own practice. And that's the same across like all heads of departments, all career positions, all production office roles. We're there as a sounding board. We're there as a, you know, we're there to sort of, I like to say, there's no stupid questions or there's no offensive questions. We're there to be a safe space to ask things that you might otherwise not feel comfortable asking an individual. And it also goes the other way as well. You know, where there is a safe space for any individuals attached to the production, whether it's cast, crew, production team as well. We're there to be a safe space for them to discuss their access requirements, whether that's, you know, due to them being deaf, hard of hearing, disabled, neurodivergent. We're there to be a safe space to talk through their entire role. So from onboarding right through to the end of their engagement, we sort of sit with them and discuss all the ways in that they work and what production needs to be aware of. And then we sort of gather that information. Then I will work with the production manager or heads of department or whoever is relevant, because we want to be as confidential in our working as we possibly can, because, you know, it's not everyone needs to know everything, you know. So we will work with the relevant parties, whether they're producers, production managers, heads departments, and we will work with them in order to address any access requirements that have come up from our conversations with the individuals. And what we've found so far is, I think at the moment, a lot of the time I'm engaged when productions already have identified someone that has disclosed that they have a disability or that they have access requirements. But what we're there to also do is create a safe space for anyone else that may come forward at a later stage in the production timeline. Because if someone sees that the producers or the production company has actually taken the steps to engage an access coordinator, it sort of gives them, I guess, builds that trust, because they're like, oh, well, they're already thinking in this space. They're already taking the steps and investing in creating an accessible and inclusive environment. maybe this is okay for me to come forward and actually share my own access requirements and not feel like it's going to be an awkward conversation, or that there's going to be repercussions or jeopardy of my own role on the production. So that's, I think, a really exciting new phase for this industry. Is we're creating safe spaces for everyone to feel empowered in their own roles and to perform effectively, so that, you know, I guess the entire process, for the producers, production company, heads of department, the crew, the cast, everyone involved has as smooth a process as possibly can, in regards to access and inclusion.
Yeah, and I think it's also good to point out as well, I think, you know, an access coordinator, Steph, you wouldn't be a, you know, a support worker on a set or anything like that. Is that something that you would probably refer to someone, a company like Bus Stop Films or something? Do you know what I mean?
That's it. And, you know, we have the networks, we have the, you know, typically, you know, it's access coordinators all typically have lived experience of disability themselves. And so we already have sort of those built-in networks of suppliers, providers, whoever they may be, other companies. And so absolutely, in my case, you know, if I identified, you know, through my conversations and my working with production, that, hey, it would be great if we had a support worker on set, for whether it's an individual or just to have someone on standby, absolutely, I would reach out to Tracy and work with Bus Stop Employment, because I know that they provide that service. And the same thing with Inclusively Made. If I'm working with production and you know, I can speak to them about Inclusively Made and the framework that they've developed, and, you know, discuss with the producers, the production company, if, you know, certification might be a process that they feel would benefit their production and how that would work. So this is, I think this discussion today is a great way to identify all the individual like players in the industry. And yes, we can all work individually, but there's also great opportunity for working and collaborating together to ensure that, again, we're creating accessible and inclusive spaces throughout our industry. And for me, it's all about empowering both sides, all sides of the equation. So yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Steph. And that's probably a really great segue over to Paul. Paul, from my understanding from what we've talked about with Inclusively Made, the certification framework, it provides, I suppose, practical actions to help make productions inclusive across all of the stages. How do you work with production companies and in partnership with access coordinators like Steph and companies like Bus Stop to help make productions more inclusive, and how do they achieve certification?
Yeah, great question. Hopefully I'll be able to answer that, Ken. So from my perspective, I think Joe gave a really good response before when she said, she mentioned something around they were looking at casting. So they reached out to Bus Stop. So there are 8 pillars using casting. So that's a really great example where we worked with Joe post-production on the certification. So we went through those 8 pillars. And when we hit the casting pillar, we're like, okay, what have you done around inclusive casting? And Joe was like, well, we worked with Bus Stop and they assisted us with, you know, who we could reach out to. And obviously 100% of the cast of people with disability, which is awesome. So they got like maximum points for that. So that's a really good example. And it goes back to Steph's point, how we can really support each other. And so then there's another question around creating a safe and inclusive working environment. And I use this anecdote always, but I did a very minimal presentation at CrewCon this year, and it wasn't even on accessibility inclusion. It was on well-being on set. But so many people said, you know, I have a non-visible disability. Sometimes I get depression, I get anxiety. And I just mentioned how throughout our safe and inclusive workplace pillar that we suggest that the shoot starts the day with an inclusion statement. And people just saying, just having an inclusion statement makes such a significant difference around, like Steph was saying, creating that safe space. And so employees who've worked on productions, you know, literally for decades, who've never been able to share what, you know, the accessibility considerations might be for fear of maybe having, you know, negative repercussions, have always kept it secret. But having that inclusion statement really, like Steph mentioned, opened up that it's actually a really safe space to be able to share that, and you'll be supported. And it's not about supporting people one-to-one. It's just basically just knowing that if people need to have a bit of respite during the day or a bit of a break or whatever, like that's supported. And sometimes, you know, sets are very busy places, and sometimes that type of culture, you know, I guess isn't supported as much as it can be. So that's a really good example of I guess how the 8 pillars can support not only inclusion of people with disability, but inclusion across the board. And then practically how it works is, like I mentioned in my introduction, we go through those 8 pillars with the respective client. We talk about concept, we talk about crew roles, we talk about mentoring roles, we talk about locations, we talk about auditions, we talk about broadcast, safe and inclusive workplaces, like I mentioned. And so across each of those 8 pillars, the production will say, okay, we're going to commit to having 1 mentee. We're going to commit to having 2 crew roles. We're going to commit to ensuring that we've got maybe audio description and captioning as part of our broadcast. We're going to meet all these obligations or commitments around creating a safe and inclusive environment. We're going to include accessible documentation. So what Joe was saying about the call sheets and things like that, really just really basic things that again benefit crew and cast with disability, but actually benefit everyone. I really talk about, I don't like reading like thick documents. I like having things in like easy read. And so easy read may actually, you know, is beneficial to someone who may have an intellectual disability, but it actually is beneficial to someone like me who just doesn't want to read a whole bunch of stuff on a page. It just gets to the point. So like I said, a lot of what we do benefits everyone on set, and that's why I feel like it's really been embraced the way it has been. And then in post-production, we go through each of the pillars, like I mentioned. Each of those pillars comes with a set, with a number of points in regards to what you've done across each of those 8 pillars. And as long as those points add to a minimum of 100, basically it gets certified. It's that easy. And so that process literally, I might defer to Jo, but we did it with her literally in about 10 minutes. It was probably less than that. But because Jo was on it like from the very beginning with Bus Stop, and they'd gone through those 8 pillars and they knew what they were going to do around that commitment to casting and crewing and all that kind of stuff, it's a very, very easy process. Literally, it's like, I don't know, I feel like almost like a teacher just ticking the boxes, but it's not just ticking the boxes, because they've done all that work beforehand. They've built their confidence, which is really important. They've built their empathy. They know the nuances around disability. They know the nuances around language. What it actually means. I know the nuances around dignity, important. And one thing I'm very proud about with the headliners is that every touch point across every part of that production thought about how can our cast be included in everything. And working with that Monday footprint was vitally important as well, because we wanted that cast to have the same experience as all those other artists performing there. And EndemolShine was so on point in making sure that happened. And it was just a wonderful experience. That's me, Ken.
Thanks, Paul. And that's probably a good segue back into you as well, Jo. I suppose, you know, it sounds like a great experience. And I suppose during that process, I'd love to hear how it's maybe raised your awareness of how productions can be more inclusive and I suppose improve access for its cast and its crew. And how that might flow into future productions that you might work on.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, at the very beginning, like, you know, I didn't know what I didn't know, you know, and some people hate that comment, but expression. And really, I think doing that training, like just starting, you know, I would say to people, you know, other people out there who are who don't know how to, you know, start start being more inclusive and you know, to kind of, you know, whether or not to get an access coordinator and how to go about it, I would say just, you know, just pick up the phone to these guys and have a conversation, because it really, you know, doing that training at the outset and having those conversations just informed me then of what all those kind of next steps needed to be, you know, and I think as a result, we ended up with our, you know, one production team in our company that, you know, are all now, I would say, very well versed, you know, in and confident. And I think the more that we can then just sort of spread that word in our company, it just becomes standard practice. And then, you know, Paul and I have been talking about how to, like, I'm a very practical minded person, you know, it's probably why I work in production, but you know, coming up with a kind of a simple sort of toolkit that we can, you know, share that information with the rest of our staff. Because it is really, it's not difficult. You know, like to Stephanie's point, it's just about planning, and it doesn't need to be, you know, for our production, obviously, our entire cast was living with disability. So, you know, it was essential that we, you know, looked at all aspects of the production. But it can be little things, you know. So I think just having an initial conversation, with an access coordinator, you know, it's really simple of like, how do we approach, you know, having more people in the team with disability? Who do we go to? You know, do we go to bus stop employment? How do we, you know, how do we have those conversations with people to make them feel more comfortable? You know, we had something that they all touched on earlier, was we had a couple of people sort of come forward through the production because they felt comfortable to sort of talk about their disability, and they hadn't really beforehand, you know. So I think that will just have a natural flow on at EndemolShine. But I think it really is just as simple as the more we talk about it and the more people experience those little things that they can do, it just becomes standard practice, and it becomes something that you think of initially on the next production.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, so Steph, we've talked about a couple of times today about how people are feeling more confident with disclosing, and, you know, not masking, or the term masking, you might want to talk about that a little bit more. But I expect that as an access coordinator, you've seen the positive influence of your role and increased access on the production process. I suppose, do you want to talk to how that can kind of enhance or encourage productions to kind of get the best out of people as well, and, you know, those type of things?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, you know, I said something before around, you know, doing the planning early on and putting in place these really practical measures creates a really smooth filmmaking process, which is what we all dream of. It's what we all want to achieve. And it really, you know, I sort of think of it as like, I don't know if the term is quite fun enough, but I can't think of a better term yet. But it really is almost like risk mitigation. Again, across all, you know, sides of the equation here. You know, doing the planning work, it sets you on the right path. It creates a safe space for people to come forward. So if people feel comfortable coming forward and that they can trust the production with the information that they need to share in order to do their job effectively and to the best of their ability, it means that they're going to be much more effective in their role. They're going to be able to carry out the role that they're there to do, that they've been engaged and are being paid to do, which is obviously going to be beneficial to the end result. It means that no one's going to sort of, I've seen it, I've heard a lot of anecdotal evidence around people that particularly, you know, struggle with, you know, mental health or maybe neurodivergent, particularly non-disclosed disabilities, or sometimes people refer to them as invisible disabilities. You know, if that's sort of chugging along, if people are, as you said, masking, where they're sort of trying their best, they're sort of going above and beyond to try and just blend into the workplace setting without having to you know, sort of ask for or share their access requirements, that can be detrimental to their own well-being, but also to the production process. If they burn out halfway through, or if something happens to them you know, during the production process, then what happens to the production? You know, you've got to then figure out, you know, you're liable for them and their well-being, so you've got to support them. You've also potentially got to bring in someone new to the mix. You've also got to, or potentially, you know, then hire someone, maybe engage, you know, an access coordinator or another support person halfway through the process, and it just gets messy. So doing this planning process from the beginning, you're putting all of these, again, I don't like the term really, but it's the only term I can think of, these risk mitigation strategies from the beginning. You're creating a safe space, and it really, again, it empowers everyone. I think, you know, Joe or Tracy mentioned earlier, you know, simple things like language can make such a huge difference in a production setting. And that's something that, you know, you don't know until you know what you don't know.
Yeah,
So,
and I think one exciting way of actually talking about the planning process is that it could also save money as well, because you're planning, you can actually avoid the costs later on. Tracy, we're going to have to move to Q&A, but I know that your inclusion in action training has actually been really successful. Do you want to give us a really hotted or quick kind of overview of that training? And then I'm going to give you all a chance to book your URLs just so people can send them to, and then I will start with the Q&A box.
Absolutely. So our inclusion and action training was developed with a grant from the federal government, and it came on the back of us working with Disney Marvel when we were placing people with disability on the set of Shang-Chi. So we met with all the heads of department and really went through, and it was co-designed by people like myself and other in our cohort who live with disability and are working in production. So it's disability confidence from the perspective of production, but we do it in a really bespoke way. So where you're up to in the production, what the team is going to need, we can do it in person or online, and break it down to the pre-production, because what you're experiencing casting call in terms of building that disability confidence might be different to what you need operationally in a production sense. And it is around understanding the framework of disability and how the context that disabled people live and where that operates in relation to the rest of the world that we live in, and then building that and bringing that down into the production, leaning into our inclusive filmmaking toolkit that we developed in partnership with our sister company Taste Creative, and looking at the resources that we can upskill and build that confidence in the teams to enact positive changes on the productions that they are working on, around working with, creatively collaborating or managing or supervising a person with disability on your production. It is a great, you know, best practice is that you would do that before production starts, and then build those processes into the flow on of how a production moves through the development cycle.
Amazing. Thank you. Do you want to give us your URL for your website?
Oh, yes, we are just busstopfilms.com.au.
Thank you. Steph, where do people find you for Dower Productions?
Yeah, they can find my information at dowerproductions.com. But excitingly, and hopefully I'm not letting the cat out of the bag just yet, but the access coordinators in Australia, we're actually developing our own website as well, which will have a whole list of all the access coordinators on that website, and where they're located around the country. So stay tuned for that. We'll be sharing that around very soon.
Right. And Paul, where do people find out more information about the certification process and all the pillars and everything else?
Yeah, it's the 3Ws inclusively-made.com. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you. All right, let's head into Q&A. We've got a few minutes left. Okay, we'll start a question for you first up, Steph, from Ben Steele. Do or will access coordinators in the future help to arrange job sharing arrangements in Screen workplaces?
Yeah, hi Ben. I believe, that's something we can definitely be working with productions to establish that process. Again, you know, when we join a production, if anyone wants to discuss their access requirements, I will actually meet with them one-on-one to have that conversation. And so, you know, if there are two people that are wanting to do a job share arrangement, we can sort of have that conversation early on in the process and work with production to, I guess, establish a plan of how that's going to work and ensure that production is supported at all times, as well as the individuals participating in the job sharing arrangement. So yeah, I would like to think that there will come a day where access coordinators are supporting people with all kinds of access requirements, not just necessarily from the DDN community, which is deaf, disabled, and neurodivergent, but yeah, happy to discuss all kinds of access requirements on a production. Yeah.
Great, thank you. A quick question for you, Joe, and I'm not sure you can talk about this probably due to confidential matters, but the question's, what was the ballpark budget required to make your project accessible, and did you come up against any pushback from any financiers that's spending at the moment? So because it's recorded, we probably best not to talk about financials or budget or anything like that, if that's okay. But did you want to talk about any pushback that you experienced, or because of the nature of this production, was it almost encouraged or anything?
Yeah, I think because of the nature of it, it was certainly encouraged. I do feel it was a little bit scrutinized in terms of like how we, you know, came up with a figure. And it was very difficult to come up with a figure because within the budget, because we were casting from all over Australia and we didn't know who we were casting, you know. So yeah, it was ambitious in that respect. But I would say I think for any budget, like it doesn't need to be a lot of money. That, you know, it can be a small amount of money, and there's lots of things that you can do that don't cost money to help make your production more inclusive. And I would say, you know, starting by just making an allowance of a small amount in your first budget, and that will grow, you know, budget to budget, and that money will kind of go far. And, you know, talking to you know, the experts in terms of, you know, how to best utilize it, and like I said, there's so many things that you can do, you know, if with training that that really don't cost anything. So it doesn't have to be a huge expense. And I think most places, you know, don't really push back on that anymore. You know, everyone, certainly all of our stakeholders and network and people were very supportive. And it kind of feeds into them wanting to create more inclusive workplaces themselves. So yeah, it certainly wasn't a hindrance, and it wasn't a barrier.
Right, thank you. Question for you, TCM. Question here, what did the impact campaign involve re-access?
I can't speak to some of the impact campaign because it hasn't been launched yet, but
yeah.
There was certainly some focus groups facilitated by the impact team at ABC that included a lot of people from across film and music industries that had lived experience to craft what were the key issues that the headliners showed. And one of them was accessibility within the live performance one. And so when you see the campaign come out, I can't speak to it, you will see that it was very much made inclusively and that it included people with disability on both sides of the camera. Yes, that they wanted to make sure that the impact campaign lent into the lived experience of people across the music side of things, because obviously the headliners series focuses on musicians, but also audiences who have disability going to view live music, and what does that entail? What does that experience? So some of the premise of the impact campaign went along those scenes, but I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag as to what that includes, because it's pretty exciting.
Great. Okay. And we don't want to give away anything there. Ken, it's been over a year since the Access Coordinator training program. What has the uptake across the industry been like? Well, Steph, you can probably speak to that one better than I can. I think I know that it took a while to get some traction, I'll be completely honest, because there was a real, you know, there was an educational piece in terms of what is the role and how does it work and everything else. But there has actually been quite a traction now, especially in the last 6 months or so, or a bit more now, and I know that a lot of the access coordinators who have been trained up by us have been working on that. Do you want to have a quick talk to that as well?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is, it was only a year ago, and the uptake that we've seen already has been quite encouraging, I guess. I think the education piece that you just spoke about is still ongoing. There's still a wide part of the industry that is still learning about what an access coordinator is, how we can come onto a production, how we can benefit a production, what we actually do on a production. So yeah, there's still a lot of education. And so obviously conversations like this really help with that as well. But in terms of uptake, yeah, so for myself, I've worked on 2 feature films this year. One was a domestic feature here in Queensland, and one was an international feature, a US feature. So again, we're seeing quite a push from the US and the UK sectors. They really prioritize this space on their productions. And so, yeah, we're seeing that push into the Australian market as well, which is encouraging. And now we have the resources to actually do that, which is really exciting. So yeah, I think there's I'd say more than 50% of the people that went through the training are working now as an access coordinator on top of the other many things that we all do as well. So yeah, I'd say this first year was kind of, I think of it almost like a bit of like a reconnaissance year, like seeing, doing the education, seeing how people are responding to it, and how we're all working. And then next year I really do see this taking up exponentially, which is really exciting.
Right, thank you. I'm gonna go through these really quickly. We're running out of time very fast. Where can we go to recruit cast or crew for our productions? We are a small independent kids animation production company. Our job descriptions encourage diversity and inclusion. Tracy, do you want to take that one?
Absolutely. We share casting calls for companies big and small all the time, and they get huge take up because we have such wide reach on social media, but we also have a lot of diverse intersectional disability community that follow our socials as well. For children's TV, a lot of parents as well, a lot of people with disabilities. So that's a service that we provide often.
Excellent, thank you. Trying to race through these. Oh, kia ora from Access Coordinator Felicity Hamill over Biditchin Aotearoa, who was one of the Access Coordinators we supported from New Zealand through that training program. Wanted to ask about headliners. I'm going to ask this question. What is it going to be available in New Zealand at any time, Joe? Are you able to answer that, or unsure at the moment?
Can't answer. I mean, hopefully. Yeah, I mean, after it airs on ABC, it's certainly we are trying to sell it internationally. So watch this space.
Thank you. Question from Kate Dixon. I'm just going to ask if there's maybe a resource that you can send to Paul. Do you want to maybe take this one, or Tracy? Or Steph, really, when you talk about inclusive language, can you give some examples of that might not seem obvious? Is there somewhere that we can send people to, or a reference, or should they just be talking to?
Yeah, we have an inclusive language guide on our website, Ken, that's available, and that really goes through kind of the do's and don'ts in a very simple way and very, very quick way. So that's a resource that's available and pretty easy to follow.
Amazing. I'm going to stop the questions there. I'm sorry if we've missed any questions, but I want to open the floor and just say any last words of advice or practical tips or anything like that. I'll ask you to keep it really quick. Tracy, you're unmuted at the moment. Do you want to head?
Absolutely. Don't just think about hiring people with disability on the projects about disability. We work across everything. We don't just make or watch content that's about disability. Hire us. Start with one. You never get hired on job B unless you get hired on job A.
Amazing. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I would kind of support that. Absolutely. We want disability represented across mainstream. Just doing mainstream things, like it's not about spotlighting disability. It's about me having coffee with some friends at a table in a background shot. To me, that's perfect. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, Joe. I'm going to, as a producer, Any advice for other producers or production companies out there?
Yeah, I would just take the first step, you know, just plan and have a short, simple conversation with one of these one of these guys at the start of your production, and it'll all unfold from there.
Thank you. And Steph, final word to you.
Yeah, I think I want to echo everything that everyone else has just said. Reach out to us. Happy to have a conversation. You might not know if an access coordinator could benefit or work with your production. You might not know, you might want to find out what each of us do better, or, you know, find out further information. So just reach out to us. I'm happy to, you know, have initial consultations. And I think we're all happy to have the conversation, because we all just want this industry to be way more accessible and inclusive. And yeah, as everyone said, across the board, you know, we want to be everywhere. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Tracy, Steph, Paul, Joe. Thank you all so very much for your time. And I encourage you to please reach out to all of our panelists here for further information and guidance. Thank you all for joining us for our webinar today. Thank you also to our Auslan interpreters today, Tyson and Therese. We will be making a recording of this webinar available on the Screen Australia YouTube channel if there's any part that you want to go back and revisit. If you've got any further questions for Screen Australia, please feel free to reach out to us at industrydevelopment@screenaustralia.gov.au. Thank you all again, and see you soon. Bye-bye.